Good afternoon, everybody. Mary Hunt here at the Water Office. I'm delighted to see all of you. I should say good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Water. We are in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm Mary Hunt, the co-director with Diane New. Diane will wave. And we are here with our staff assistant, Brooke Andrews, who will wave. And we welcome in a very hearty way today 2 new water interns from Germany. And those of you who've known water over the years know that the best part of water are the interns.
Right.
And they come and it was Bernadette on the meditation the other night commented on the articles that several of the interns had written in this newsletter, which is what we're discussing. But truly, we have 2 new people with us this year for the year. They are Magdalena Mueller, right there, Thuringia in Germany, with us for the Irani program, which is a peace and justice program in Germany, and also part of the Brethren Voluntary Service program here in the US. And also with us is Wed Naji, and I think I saw Wed getting on. I don't see her at the moment, but I think she's on. Wed, are you with
I
us?
just saw her. She's on. So take a look. She's on screen 2 on my.
Okay, well, maybe we could spotlight, maybe Brooke, you could spotlight Wed.
Hey,
who's at
Wed.
home today. So delighted to have both of them. And there's Wed. Oh, Wed, getting over your cold, I hope. We're happy you're with us. Wed is from Bonn in Germany, and she has finished high school, and Magdalena has finished university, and they're both terrific workers. And for native speakers of English, we are put to shame. We are put to shame by the skills of these people. So a hearty welcome to these good women who'll be with us for the year, and to all of you as we continue our fall programs. I want to offer a special word of welcome to those who are new to water today. If this is your first water program, you are especially welcome, and I hope you feel at home and experience the richness that Nancy Sylvester brings to us today. We at Water always begin our programs with a land acknowledgement. I invite you to join me for this. We've incorporated a land acknowledgement into all of our programs to remind us of why we do what we do and why, given the systemic injustice against Indigenous and other people of color in this country, we have more work to do. A land acknowledgement is a beginning, it's not an end, a time to reflect on our history and to commit to justice making. Water is on the Indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland, of the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and the injustice toward Indigenous peoples and other people of color that is so deep in American culture and history. We join as Water in efforts to eradicate that injustice and to make reparations for the genocide involved. Water's work, whether intellectual, spiritual, or liturgical, is aimed at bringing about social change. I invite you to just take a quiet moment together to remember the Native people on whose land you sit. And please feel free to put their names in the chat if you wish, to remind all of us of the richness of our ancestors. Let us take a quiet moment. Thank you. I invite you now to mute the audio of your machine of choice so that we have a nice clear line for our speaker. And I want to begin by saying that Water's work brings feminist and womanist spiritual values and intellectual resources to efforts for social change. I'll say that again. Our work is to bring feminist and womanist spiritual values and intellectual work to efforts for social change. Our hope is that by sharing this work, as we do in this setting today, we're socializing the resources of feminist, womanist work in religion, and thus spreading tools and energy for justice. I think you'll discover in this hour how deeply we dovetail with Nancy's efforts. She says almost the same thing in her new book. Let me begin by laying out the format of how we will proceed in this hour. I'll introduce our speaker and her theme. Then Nancy will share her book, which I will hold up numerous times, Journey Faith in an Entangled World. She will share from her book, including some time for us to experience what it is that she's doing in the book. So that'll be lovely. Then the floor will be open for questions and answers for discussion until the top of the hour, which will be 2 p.m. on the East Coast. We'll officially close the Zoom at 2 p.m., but will remain open for conversation for those who wish to continue. I invite you to listen and to enjoy. We will take notes, and the notes will be on our website shortly, along with the video of this session. So you can go back to this, watch it again, listen, share it with others. You simply go to www.waterwomensalliance.org, look under programs and teleconferences or WATERtalks, and you'll find this material for your use, and we urge you to use it. Since you registered, you'll also receive the notes and the link to the video in your email within the next week. So please feel free to socialize these resources. This is what we do. I want to begin by saying how highly I recommend Nancy's book, Journey Faith in an Entangled World. It can be purchased on Amazon for $18.95. And because it's a workbook format, there's sections in her book called Spaciousness to Create. You might want to give this to some of your friends for a gift. Maybe do a book club on it. Have an opportunity to engage in some of these exercises together. I highly recommend it, and I'll say more about it later. But let me introduce Nancy and turn this over to her. Nancy Sylvester, IHM, and I have known each other, Nancy, since I came to Washington in 1983. I think we were in about the 6th grade at that point, but there we were.
And we were, Mary, we were.
Nancy, you were working at Network at the time, the Catholic Social Justice Lobby, and today Nancy happens to be in Chicago for a reunion of some of those who've ridden the Nuns on the Bus. And so she's taken an hour out of her busy schedule there to be with us, for which we're delighted. Nancy was working at Network when I met her, and she became the director of Network later on. She then served in leadership, elected leadership, both in her own community, the Sisters Servants of the Immaculate Heart of Mary of Monroe, Michigan, and she served in the presidency of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, the LCWR. Her presidential address at LCWR was a foundation for the work that she has done since, bringing contemplative practice and communal conversation to the service of social change. Doesn't that sound like water to you? In 2002, Nancy founded the Institute for Communal Contemplation and Dialogue, and we'll put their location, their link in the chat, because if you haven't looked at their website recently, it's really worth the gander. She offers a range of programs through ICCP.
Jim and Peggy told me that we're
Please,
having a short
please
meeting
mute
after
your-
No,
Dear
that
friends,
was only
please mute
before
your-
we set up the date.
the date won't work for Peggy.
Please
She
mute
said
your
yes, just a
please
few minutes
mute your
ago.
phones if you can.
24th
Please
would work.
mute your
Yeah.
machines.
Check her at lunch.
Yeah,
Thank you.
maybe.
If there's
Brooke,
no
you can-
problem, no meeting, but we'll see.
Thank you very much. Nancy founded the Institute for Communal Contemplation and Dialogue in 2002, and she offers through it a range of programs and has a number of colleagues who've been part of this work over the long years. You may have been lucky enough, as I was, to be part of the early Engaging Impasse workshops that she conducted. Those helped dozens of women and a few good men to deal with the frustrations, the challenges, and the opportunities presented by several conservative papacies in the Reagan-Bush years, just for starters. Little did we know then how enduring the problems we dealt with would turn out to be, how long we would be engaging impasse. But we did know some techniques and some resources for dealing with all of it, the most valuable of which, in my view, is our sharing of contemplative practice, doing it together. We do that here at Water every one Monday night a month, and we do it thanks to Nancy. We use your model, Nancy, and we've been doing it all these years. Nancy's a well-known speaker for many of you. She's a writer and a process facilitator. She co-authored 2 books, one entitled Trouble and Beauty, Women Encounter Catholic Social Justice Teaching, and another one which is actually about the Engaging Impasse process, Crucible for Change. And I recommend both of those to your reading. Nancy, it's a delight for us to welcome you and to celebrate you with this launch of the new book, Journey Faith in an Entangled World. As I said in my blurb for the book, which I will read, imagine a world in which contemplation, deep immersion into the whole of being, were a regular practice. Nancy Sylvester offers simple techniques and inviting themes for personal and communal reflection. Dialogue that emerges from holding lightly the woes and wonders of the world is a real help and a great hope for cultivating oneness. Let me read that part again. Dialogue that emerges from holding lightly the woes and wonders of the world is a real help and a great hope for cultivating oneness. Just imagine and try it with this guidebook. That's my blurb, and there are wonderful other ones too by people like Margaret Thompson and many others who have so appreciated this book, Nancy, even before publication. So I'll leave it to you. It's a celebration today. It's an educational time, and it's a time for spiritual sharing. You'll explain to us the structure of the book. It's written in the form of an art exhibit, just to tantalize those who haven't seen it. And I know that by the end, we'll want to roam through all of the galleries and enjoy the show. Thanks, Nancy, and welcome.
Oh, thank you, Mary. And that was a lovely introduction. I think I'll have to steal it. That was perfect. You really filled in a lot of places about my life. And I just want to thank you and Diane because the years of water have been marvelous years for so many of us throughout the world. And it's just a delight to be part of your formal presentations. So I just really thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. So yes, the name is Journey Faith in an Entangled World. And Mary's spoken a bit about what I've been doing, and I noticed I did know quite a few of you on the screen, but just a little bit more of the early history, because I think it places the context for so many people, perhaps of my age, possibly younger, but who grew up in a world without change for the most part. I grew up in the 50s in Chicago. I was a traditional Catholic little girl. I loved the church. I loved everything about it. I loved the prayers. I loved the songs. I loved the rituals. I loved Catholic school. It was just, this was a world that I felt very comfortable in, very clear, very either or kind of a world. And of course, at that time, if opportunities for women were more limited. But I always sort of felt drawn to be a nun. I loved God and I wanted to be perfect. And some of you might remember that there was a time when the church taught, the Catholic Church, that perfection came in religious life, but not in married life. And so there I was in 1966, entering the religious community, the IHMs that Mary mentioned from Monroe, Michigan. And I thought that's the world I was entering. Well, those of you who are not of Catholic tradition may not remember the 1963 Second Vatican Council. In essence, it threw open the doors of a church that pretty much stayed the same since the Middle Ages. And so there was a great feeling that there was new theology. I was learning new things when I entered, but just before I entered, of course, things were changing already in my congregation. So I already, when I got there, felt a little like, oh dear, I'm not sure. I wasn't going to wear the postulate habit. We weren't going to change our names. All sorts of things were happening. But our sisters were already being educated in the new theology. So what I learned in those 3 years of formation, what we called formation at the time, was process philosophy, process theology, the beginnings of liberation theology, all the encyclicals that came out of the Vatican Council, and I learned how to pray. And I was introduced to the mystics, Teresa of Avila, the more modern day Merton. I even picked up the Divine Milieu when I was a postulant. So at 17, reading Teilhard. Now, I probably thought I knew what he said. I'm sure I didn't, but I was attracted to him. And so with that kind of desire and learning, I continued it when I went to St. Louis University, and I finished my degree, undergraduate degree in philosophy and political science. And that was also where I was learning so many newer things. Quantum mechanics came into my philosophy classes, more of the evolution, women's movement. I got a hands-on experience with the economically disadvantaged, with the peace movement, with the women's movement. And that continued throughout my life, sort of the 3 pillars: ongoing learning, reading, thinking, action, doing work directly and indirectly, systemically for social justice, and then the commitment to an interior life and prayer. And so needless to say, as one starts to travel through, as Mary mentioned, some of the things that I was doing in my ministerial experiences. I was teaching religion in high school to the most wealthy area in Michigan, then to the city, a totally African-American community, went to network for 15 years at a time of incredible explosion of movements. If, Mary mentioned water started in 83, did you say? Network in 71, Common Cause, you had the women's movement, you had the incredible time of women's singing and music, the anti-war movement. It was just a thrilling time to be a spiritual within the Washington community. And so all of that really was feeding me throughout this time. And then I was in elected leadership, as Mary said. And during that time when I was with the presidency of the larger national conference of women leaders, I had to go to Rome. Someone like Mary Ann Dudley, who's there now, but we had to go and talk to them about what was happening with religious life. And that really became a critical, maybe a turning point. You know how you already know things and all of a sudden something happens and it becomes clear. And when I left Rome, I said, and when I left leadership, I said, I've got to do something about this. We've got to find ways of addressing the impasse, the kind of, at that time, really horrendous dismissal of women throughout the church ministries. We had the Iraq, the first invasion at that time was under George Bush. So so many of us who were working in justice were feeling, what are we going to do? We're powerless. Not unlike, I think, probably we feel today in many ways. So how can we engage impasse from another place, from a much deeper place, from one, and I said, contemplative place? How can we together, and felt that it was no longer time to do one's own private reflection, but time to socialize it. And in socializing it, how do we do communal contemplation and engage in dialogue? So really for the last 22 years, seems like a very long time, I have been doing work that many of you have participated in, and even some of you helped to guide, in terms of engaging impasse and coming to a new understanding. How do we begin to live out of a contemplative heart? And then also more recently, enter the chaos, engaging the differences to make a difference.
What is term, yes.
And so what we have been doing then is really trying to keep deepening. How do we take our commitment to justice, our new understandings of who we are, of how we see God, of how we see the world, rooted in contemplation, and begin to create and imagine a world propelled by love. So that's sort of the framework of this book, is my hope. And that I wanted the sense that perhaps after all these years, maybe it was time to take a look and see if it could be for a wider audience. So coming to the book, I know people say, well, how do you know when you should write a book, or why did you write a book? Well, I never thought, after the Crucible for Change back in the early maybe 2013 or 2011, I thought about a book, but it didn't feel like it was in me, because I didn't want to do it just out of ego, write a book because you should write a book and blah, 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 but rather something that really was from the spirit. Well, I had been writing, some of you know this, for the Global Sisters Report, which is a part of the National Catholic Reporter, which is a progressive Catholic newspaper, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, every month since 2014. So the woman who is working with me on the website just surprisingly put it all together in a booklet. She ran them all off with the pictures and the reflection and gave it to me. Well, it was late August of 2022, and I thought, I started looking at it, I started reading it, and some of you may have had this experience. You're looking at something you wrote and you wonder, who wrote it? It's really good. This maybe has something to say to people. And I thought maybe it was. And I invited, if anyone would be willing, I was having a little, I love salons, so I had a little salon, and there were a few women there. And I said, would anyone be willing to read these and see if they might be they could be work with them somewhat and see if we can do something with it. Well, someone did. It was someone in my own community. And she took it and she read them all. She combined some things, she blended them. I was still writing. So she was working on it, and she created sort of a draft manuscript. So I sent it out to about 20, 23 people to say, look at it. Would you read it? Is it worthwhile to be pursued? So they came back, and I have to say it's quite humorous to me even today. They said, you know what, you should go for it. This is great stuff here. You got to do it. But you know what? You're not clear about who you're writing for. You're not clear really on why you're writing. And we really don't like the organizing principle. She had done it around the liturgical calendar, which I have to say, I was personally, that wouldn't have been my choice, but I asked her to see what she could work with. Well, it was great, not because you know what happens in the process. Instead of saying, oh dear, I'm not going to do it, it broke open for me a whole new way of approaching it then. And I could then quickly sort of see, get rid of this, it's not based on liturgical, because it's not just for Catholics. It's not for, it's really for spiritual people, however we want to define that. And I put it together in a different way. But during the course of that, I would call this, her name's Mary Catherine. I say, Mary Catherine, you're like a curator of an art exhibit for me. You're going through what I've done. You're looking at stuff, you're putting it this way, you're suggesting these things, and you're organizing it. So that's how it came to be that I would be putting it as an art exhibit, is how I then would formulate or organize a book. But before that, maybe I should tell you why I wrote the book. To whom did I write the book? And then we'll take a look at the book. I first want to just talk about the title. It's Journey-Faith in an Entangled World. Interestingly enough, Pope Francis uses the word journey faith as in contrast to a lab faith or a creedal faith, one that is pretty much intellectual and rational, but addressing the need that faith evolves. Faith is connected to the other parts of life. Entanglement is a key concept in quantum physics. So entanglement means everything is connected. So unlike in some earlier times, how we learned, you'd go to church on Sunday, your life is Monday through Saturday. We learn new psychology, but we keep the morality rooted in some ancient constructs. Evolution, I mean, today even how many people do not believe in evolution, but how important it is to see the interconnection of it with our life and how we experience things. So that entanglement became important. So it became journey faith in an entangled world. And why I wrote the book touches on some of that. I really, having worked so long in social justice and in seeing how prayer is not separate from action and how can we be transforming, helping to transform the world, I wanted to explore how do you address problems of today out of a different consciousness than the one that you created them. That's Einstein's. Remember, he said, we can't solve the problems of today out of the same consciousness that created them. And that took me over my lifetime. I've read quite a bit about the transformation of consciousness, the development of consciousness. And I thought that's important to keep trying to say just giving some new ideas to address the false separation of faith and science, which we've inherited. I mean, it's been since Copernicus and Galileo. And some of you who are coming out of the Catholic tradition might remember John Paul II, really within the last, 20 years he was living, said that maybe Galileo was correct. I mean, that is how absolutely we've wasted a lot of time not seeing the connections. And quite frankly, we didn't really know all of that, or not everyone was not yet writing about how much we're all connected with everything. And then how can I live within my faith tradition? I'm a Catholic sister. And it's, you walk a line, you're not alone. I'm not like a private person writing, I'm connected. And so how can I continue to live my own faith and integrating insights of evolution, insights of the transformation of consciousness, insights of quantum physics? And to share how contemplative prayer really invited me to take a long, loving look at the real. And that phrase, it's common, some say the English mystics used it quite a bit, but I find that really important because you're not looking outside of what is. It's just we don't see what is. You're taking a long, loving look at the real. So you're able to see in new ways what's right in front of you. And that's quite a bit what I'm hoping the book stimulates, excites in people to, from a contemplative place, take a new look at the real. And so that long loving look then not only is a transformation of self, but a re-engagement with the world in new ways. And that's a part that's still going on. How do we do it? And for me, I mean, we can talk about it, but regardless of who wins this election, as important as it is of who would be, we are not going to be healed. We are still going to be facing incredible polarities and incredible tensions. And so how can we begin to keep moving forward, rooted in a contemplative space? And then finally, to simply share my experience of God, divine mystery, entangled with everyday life as signs of hope on the journey. And to whom did I write this book for? I hope us, people like us, hopefully younger people. I mean, I love Brooke and Bridget, since you're good in English, you can just read it and to say, you know, let me know, how does it connect to people who didn't grow up in an extremely traditional world? I mean, we're sort of now the spectrum of folks. And yet I do feel that many people are longing for a spirituality, and they don't know where to turn exactly. And sometimes they're turning to a very conservative because there's some values there, but it doesn't fit for so many. So that's a piece of it. And I'm hoping, and for anyone who wants to do something about the world, even when it's faced and it seems like it's so chaotic and we're at such an impasse. So that gives you a little bit of the who, the what, the why, and now what? Well, as Mary has looked up at this, you've seen the beginning of it, but Journey Faith is done like an art exhibit. Okay, so it invites you to engage the reflective pieces through a contemplative practice, so as to see in new ways, to receive each work, engage with it in I will give suggested contemplative practices, but enter into some contemplative space and then see what it evokes in you. And part of this was because the artist that I had working with me, when we were talking about this, she said, you know, when you go to an art exhibit, you're not seeing the creative process there. You're seeing the residual of the creative process. The real creation happens internally with the person. And so none of us can tell each other who God is. We've got to experience that. And so hopefully what I'm doing is invoking, inviting, and helping to set a stage to do that. So there, and then as Mary mentioned, there's some places to actually write down if you want to write in the book, a spaciousness for your own creativity. So it's an art exhibit in which your words are the paint and the canvas are the paper and the pieces in the book. So there are 7 galleries. Now the first gallery continues my artist's journey. And so it tells you a little bit more about, oh, here we go, a little bit more about the various things that I was studying. So spiral dynamics, Beatrice Brutto, centering prayer. It gives you sort of the contextual, the context of the book. The second gallery is the medium. If that's, I don't know if that's blurry. There you go. Which is contemplation. So just like when you go into an art gallery, they have a little piece about the artist, then a little piece about the kind of painting they do. So this is a contemplation. And I'm asking in the note from the author to perhaps make sure you reflect on the first 2 first. And then after that, just meander through the galleries. And what the galleries are a number of reflections on different themes. So this is taking a long, loving look at the real. And here, these are the critical issues of today. So it's climate change, it's sexism, it's violence, it's the things we're facing. The next gallery is political life and democracy, which actually I think has some good pieces before the election. It's again, if you're talking to people, I tried very much not to be partisan or to be terribly, I'm not trying to make people, it's to open up how you're looking at the political world, our democracy, leadership, coming from a gospel. So if there's a common thing, if it's not so much Catholic teaching is there, but it's really coming out of the gospel. How do we begin to look at things anew? The next gallery are the liturgical seasons, from Advent to Easter, So it's again, taking, in this case, the tradition and looking at it in a different way, different, new way, expressing it in a new way. Then come to the seasons. So we take a look at summer, fall, winter, spring, and then the future, the transformative power of communal contemplation. I wrote those so they shouldn't be, they're not too heady. So there's a lot of the same kind, there's very similar kind of things that you might read in Ilio Delio, but a lot of people can't read Ilio Delio for lots of reasons. This hopefully will come to a much more I'm hoping, is not so filled with academic pieces, but they're here in the end notes. So anything that, wondering like, well, why did she say Beatrice Brutto as a good sense of transformation of consciousness? It's in here, so it'll be end notes. And then a rather extensive bibliography, because people have asked me over the years, what have I read? So it's not complete, but it's probably more extensive than some. So that then is, galleries 327 is to ask you to just meander, take it in, and then see it might be something inspired. It might have, you recognize something else. You may take a whole nother issue that you can look at out of this contemplative space. So what I'd like to do before we go into any questions, but maybe you want to jot them down before we go, I want to engage us in just a few minutes of a contemplative pause, I'd say this time. And then I'm going to basically read one of the reflections and invite you to listen to it from that spaciousness, okay? So let's just, if you have just maybe a half a minute or minute, if you have questions, so you don't forget them, jot them down, and I'll open up the book and we'll begin to sit in a little bit of a quiet space, okay?
As we're doing that, Nancy, I'm just going to once more mention the name of the book so people can write it down as well.
Thank you.
Journey Faith in an Entangled World, and you can get it on Amazon for $18.95. And again, I want to recommend it, as Nancy has shown us the content of it. I want to recommend it also for the style. And she's absolutely right. It's completely accessible to the general reader. And it is user-friendly. It's even lovely and beautiful, Nancy. I love it. I love the design. I love the size of it. It has, that's consistent with what you're trying to do. So please go ahead. I just couldn't resist a quick.
Very good. And it comes, so now we'll go into a sort of a quiet space. I know all of you who are at Water, you do your contemplative sitting with Mary and Diane all the time. There's lots of ways of talking about contemplation. And today, we're not always so specific. So you have mindfulness, you have meditation, you have contemplation. But for me, what I have found incredibly helpful, and some of this might be personality and some of this is a spirit, is the kind of contemplative quieting that you don't think. You're not trying to make the prayer. You're not even emotion, you're not like taking, how sometimes in meditation they say, take a person in the scripture, become that person. How do you invoke it? That's another way of doing it. This is really a way of sort of beginning to empty, to create a spaciousness within you, to be open to the divine working within you. As we're all, I believe, eventually becoming our God self. And how do we continually open ourselves to that, informed by good theology, good spirituality, however we want to talk about that. And then you just sit quietly. And for me, what it has done is allows me to awaken to ways of seeing things in new ways and to be a little more consistently aware and evoking in me new responses to things that I might have thought I had a definite perspective on, or I thought in a certain way. So just with that, if we would just hold and just invoke, and especially today, we know we are facing so many crises. And so part of centering prayer, and this really comes out of that tradition. Some of you know Thomas Keating, Cynthia Bourgeois. You want to it's a transformation of self, but also the world. And so today, just knowing there are so many people who just desire and need another way of seeing things. So if you can sit up straight, that's always helpful. Your feet on the ground, because you're drawing in energy, and just your hands on it could be on your knees or within the palms, or, you often see people you're holding the energy field. And there's so much we have to learn about energy fields. And that's also hinted throughout the book. So I think given the time, Mary, because we want to do, I'm just going to have a sit for 3 minutes. I know that isn't long, but I'm going to keep you there as I read. So just a 3-minute breathe in a bit, in and out before we sit, and then I'll just be quiet for that time. So if you bring your attention back then, and just listen with that open heart and see what gets evoked in you or challenges you or simply says, I knew that. We have to be carefully taught to hate. As I reflected on the violent demonstrations that resulted from the white supremacist and neo-Nazi march in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, the lyrics of a song in South Pacific by Rodgers and Hammerstein came to mind. It is a song that isn't always on the list of top tunes of that musical. It is sung by a U.S. officer who is falling in love with a young Native woman and is struggling with his feelings toward her. The words that have always haunted me are, "You've got to be taught to hate. You've got to be carefully taught before it's too late, before you are 7 or 8. I found myself saying over and over, "You've got to be carefully taught," as I watched the coverage of Charlottesville and the violence began. I was sickened as I saw the bottles being thrown at those who came to stand in nonviolent opposition to the white nationalists, the Klan, and the alt-right. It is hard for me to understand how there are still people who believe that the United States of America is and should be a white nation. Or perhaps I don't want to believe this about my fellow citizens. It is a worldview well expressed in that 1949 musical. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. That teaching happens consciously and unconsciously. I began to reflect. When do we begin to see color as a defining characteristic, indicating inferiority or superiority? When do we look at noses, lips, hair, and body shapes and formulate judgments about what kind of a person she or he is? When do we hear grammar and voice intonations as signs of one's level of education or upbringing? When do we no longer see individuals, but only perceive them as a group that is threatening a way of life? When do we learn to be afraid and hate the other? Who teaches us that? So many people and in so many ways. As the song says, you have to be taught before it's too late, before 7 or 8. The question for us is, how can we be untaught? Perhaps it not need be said that such unteaching would involve how the media portrays difference, what is taught in schools, and how churches speak about race and religion. But it has to touch more deeply into our very being. We need to see with new eyes and hear with new ears. We need to take a long, loving look at the real. We have work to be done if we are to survive and thrive as a loving, relational community of great and complex diversity. What obstacles are you aware of in yourself to seeing that we are all one? This is hard work. Contemplative practice helps us to do this. It helps us to get in touch with how we are all one and more similar than different. It helps us become aware of our biases, so rooted in culture and familial beliefs. It helps us surrender to the divine working within us to teach us who we really are in this planetary community. What is arising in you as you reflect on what needs to be untaught? So we'll just pause for another minute and I'll just see if anyone has any response. And then we'll move into questions. Because we're only going to do this for a short time, Mary, maybe if people either just raise their hand or if they do their thing, we can just call in maybe 2 or 3 if there are any hands up. I don't see everybody, so I can't.
Thank you. Nancy, thank you for this. If people would like to make a very brief response to what was evoked in the meditation, this would be the moment to do that. We'll take 2 or 3 and then we'll move to a more general conversation. But we don't want to lose the richness of this moment. Again, with thanks to you, Nancy. The floor is open. If you use the react button at the bottom of your screen, it has a little heart and it says react. And if you just press the heart, it will show you the raise hands function. I've just raised my hand, and then you can lower your hand. And please feel free to use that. It brings you right up to the top of the queue. And if for some reason you're thwarted by the technology, this works also, just waving your hand and the front paw is approach, and we'll see you that way. So first, a couple of just quick responses to the meditation, and then we'll move to more general questions and answers. Let's start with Jean.
A quick thought is I need to I need to be untaught the value of knowledge of good and evil.
Oh, interesting.
Thank you. The floor is open. Yes, Carrie Roach, we're praying for you in Florida this day. Go ahead. Unmute, please, Carrie.
Thank you. I need to unlearn and really focus my ways about moving beyond the binary, beyond he and she, and the intrinsic rights of humans are just a small part. There's also the intrinsic connections and rights of all other beings and bioregions and systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, our prayers are with you. One more, perhaps?
Oh, I think I see Anna.
Anna, go ahead.
I'm from Africa, and coming here, it was so different to see how there are so many differences or how people of color are treated. And what Nancy has shared with us, for me, I have to learn to be more compassionate, because some of these people, they were taught when they were so young that it's very difficult to even know what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. And a warm welcome to you. Unless anyone else has something pressing on this, I suggest we go to more general conversation now. Again, with thanks to Nancy, both for the book and for this lovely experience together of communal contemplation. The floor is open, same drill, use the raise hands button if you can, and if you can't, wave and someone will acknowledge you. The floor is open. We'll stop at the top of the hour and then continue conversation with those who wish to stay on, but we'll close formally at the top of the hour. Yes, Jean, you've already had a chance, so maybe we could try somebody else who hasn't had a chance yet, if that's okay.
Yes.
Yes, Mary Hurley. Thank you. Mary, if you could unmute your self there. The microphone on. There you go.
This is a comment rather than a question of gratitude, Nancy, for pulling all this together. You have been one of my mentors over many years, working education for justice after moving out of the formal classroom of teaching. And I think the way you have integrated so many of the, I don't like the word issues, but so many of the concerns and the realities that we are trying to address, and putting that into the larger context, which sometimes is just one more thing of discernment. So I'm really grateful for the way you have integrated so much. And I look forward to being in the gallery.
Well, great. Thanks, Mary. And also thank you for all your work all the years. You've done great things. Thank you. It's good to see you.
Good to be here.
Thanks, Mary. And follow her good lead. If you have a comment you'd like to make that's not really in the form of a question, that's fine too. The floor is open. Anyone? Yes. Margaret Ellen, go right ahead.
Yeah, I guess I was once again struck by that sense of seeing things in newer ways and seeing clearly. And it brought me immediately back to Mark's gospel, where there was 2 levels of healing in that blind man. And I think that's what Nancy is trying to say to us. There's more healing to be done in the ways we see. And so I'm grateful for that insight.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you, Margaret Ellen.
Just to pick up on Margaret's, I think that's what I'm hoping. That some of these experiences are just everyday occurrences in your life, that all of a sudden you start to see the interconnections of it. And maybe with something that you read or something that you know or something that's uncomfortable, and you just take it into a new place. You're allowing, that's, to me, that's the spirit inside. It's our ego, which we need, but the ego cannot continue to lead us at this time in our life. And so how do we really allow the understandings that we're all connected to prevail? I mean, that's a critical, and for the mystics, that was one of their significant experiences, the unity, the sense of a wholeness rather than put into little boxes like we are here, except we have a whole screen. So thank you. I mean, I hope it's like the everydayness of our world too, besides the more difficult issues.
Thank you. The floor is open.
And Mary Jean did have her hand up at one point. I just don't want to, in case.
Yes, Jean, go ahead if you'd like to.
Yes, I just want to thank Carrie for the binary. It prompted in me the unlearning the dualistic perspective, which Nancy was just speaking about, which constricts us from our perspective of wholeness.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, very important point. Karen? Unmute, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
I haven't read this book, but I got it and it looks very inviting. And I just wanted to say, too, I'm just struck when we're talking about unlearning both, you know, the pause, but I think the communal aspect of that is something I really value, where I'm not in a religious community per se of, you know, I am, but not this chance through times like this, or these opportunities to pause collectively is really helpful. And I think for me, for how we do negotiate through these very difficult times, there must be times when we pause individually, but in some, of course, connection with the body of Christ or one another. And so I'm just really grateful for this time like this, to reminder of in these times, there are many people pausing and being, I hope, you know, poised to be open and to be transformed and help be agents of that in the world. So I just been thinking about communal aspects. So thank you.
Thanks. Nice to see you, Karen.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. A welcome comment. Mary Gallion, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for your work and for today's presentation. One of the things I need to learn is the interconnectedness with all sentient beings. I find it difficult sometimes to look at various animals, trees, plants, and especially those which I consider dangerous, and feel that there is an interconnection. Yeah. So it's a learning that is yet to come.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, please go ahead, Julie.
I appreciate what Nancy has done over the years for me, along with Richard Rohr, the encouragement to sit with the tensions and realize I have a difficult time accepting people whose views are very different from mine. And we have a lot of that in our political life today. So sitting with the tension and the difficulties and knowing that we are connected in maybe more important ways than some of the chatter, the noise. So I appreciate that. And I look forward to the book. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks for bringing that up in terms of the differing opinions. As I mentioned, I guess a little earlier, even after the election, we are really faced, I think, with some critical choices in the how our nation is, the world is really evolving at this time. And, you know, if you ever listen to Brian Swim, destruction is as much a power of the universe as creation. And depending on what time we're in and how things have to be destroyed and go down in order to something new. But what comes forward, though, is important to us. We are evolution emerging. And so our choices are critical, and how to be able to understand each other and try to move into a space of some understanding, I think, is getting more and more important. So I'm glad you brought that up. Haven't seen you in an age.
They don't call us the Women's Alliance for nothing, Nancy. It's time to, to see your friends and to meet people and to deepen the bonds. Diane New, you're smiling up there.
Oh, Nancy, I'm so grateful that at this moment in history, you are bringing us back or into our contemplative selves. And, you know, you named your history and your history moving forward into engaging impasse and really bringing us the contemplative side. It's so important right now. And I just want to say thank you, because it's the only way we're going to get through at this point, wherever the going through is.
Thanks, Mary. I mean, thanks, Diane. And all your rituals help us do that too. So just make sure that if you don't have Diane's book on rituals, you've got to get it. Many of them.
Thank you.
Thanks to you both. We're needless to say, we're all old friends. I think you have a key to our house, Nancy. Actually, as I was.
I still do.
I want to just ask you one last question, and then before we close formally, and then people can stay on and talk, and I hope you'll stay on for even a
Sure.
few minutes if you can. But I just want to pick up on this theme that's come up several times, which is the election coming up in less than a month. And I'm just wondering, out of your experience and wisdom, what's your best suggestion for us in terms of ways to pray and meditate without losing hope, and without losing the vision of justice? What are some of your what is like one of you just one kind of um, sort of ballpark suggestion for us? Because I think a lot of us are coming upon that experience with some trepidation, not knowing how we're going to deal the day after, depending on how the outcome goes, and even if it goes the other way than we had hoped or whatever. What's your, is there something you could say, just a word that would help us to together look forward to that in a healthy and integrated way? I'm not asking you to solve the world's problems, but just
No, I know. And I actually I've been, thinking about, not exactly framed that way, but what helps me, and what has over this last, I'd say, couple years helping, is really understanding that we are a key part of evolution, but it takes time. And that a very simple, I look at our country, and if I can say this simply, I do believe that our consciousness develops, and it's not in a hierarchical way. The word is a holarchy. We continually be moving like a spiral. You encounter, so let's say, as racism has become so much more critical and understandable, systemic racism and sexism, as that begins, those of us who are privileged at one way of even learning about that or experiencing it and saying something's wrong, move into another place. We are now incorporating values of the earlier time and then moving forward. The danger is, and I think what happened is, we don't incorporate the earlier values. And so we start to get separate. And so people, to try to understand, it's Julie's question, how do I try to at least understand the other? And what of the other is in me? I mean, the piece in here about witnessing presence in the book really employs some of Thomas Keating's things. I've got to be in touch with my own shadow as I'm praying, so that I'm not the savior of the world. I am a critical component of the future. So how can I at least know that it will go on, whatever happens, and we will be challenged, but can I come out of love? And I can't always do that. So it's the silencing in that contemplative space for me, Mary, that keeps me sort of not balanced yet, but provides me an opportunity to look at things just slightly different, and that I won't use language of hatred toward them. And it's hard in this case. I mean, this is a very unique situation with Mr. Trump, but it's very hard. So I know that's more than one word, but I just say keep doing probably what you're doing and trying to understand the other in this time, especially if they're family members, members of your congregation, members of your parish, whatever you might encounter. So, and others here might even have better wisdom than I on this. So,
well, thanks, Nancy. Let's pick this up after the formal close. See if there are other ideas on this, because you're right. This is a moment in some ways more challenging than we have faced, at least in my lifetime. So thank you. And I want to echo Diane in saying thank you for the real contribution that this approach is, and how timely it is, Nancy. And it's just a marvelous thing. And again, folks, Journey Faith in an Entangled World, available on Amazon, Nancy's new book, and I can't recommend it highly enough. You read my blurb, you'll understand what I think now maybe you understand what I meant when I said at the beginning of our conversation, that this really is a book that takes something and turns it into something new. Imagine a world in which contemplation, deep immersion into the whole of being, were a regular practice. Simple techniques, inviting themes, dialogue that emerges from holding lightly the woes and wonders of the world. Just imagine and try it with Journey Faith in an Entangled World as your guidebook. Nancy, thank you so kindly.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Water. Thank you, everyone who came. And
Let me, thank you. And let me, before we,
Nancy.
let me simply mention the next water programs. There will be one, in fact, on October 29th, The Ritual with Diane New and the water community. And it is exactly the theme we just touched on, getting ready for election results. Some spiritual practices and ways to support one another within the octave of a very important election. And then on the eve of the election, we will have with us beloved Rosemary Ganley from Canada, who will lead our meditation on Monday, the 4th of November at 7:30 p.m. And having a Canadian colleague lead that meditation is extremely important, I think. Not to mention Rosemary Ganley, who is currently in Rome with Marion Duddy Burke. They just had lunch together. So you can imagine that the people out and around the synod are moving some good energy over there in Rome. And then the Water Talk, the next one in this series, will be very exciting on Wednesday, November 13th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Grace Cow, who is an ordained United Church of Christ minister and professor at Claremont School of Theology and a surrogate mother, will be talking about her book, My Body, Their Baby, a progressive Christian vision for surrogacy. My Body, Their Baby, a progressive Christian vision for surrogacy. And as surrogacy begins to become part of the reproductive justice conversation, I think having the view of an ordained minister who's a professor of theology and ethicist, My Body, Their Baby, will be very, very helpful for our continuing education. Let me close by saying that water programs are free. They're open to everybody. Donations are welcome and needed. What we try to do is socialize our resources. So those who can donate do so, and they do so generously, so that we can always make water programs available to everyone without charge. We believe if we share, among us, there's enough. I repeat, if we share, among us, there's enough. And we've been very fortunate over 40 years to be able to live that experience of among us there being enough. This is another example of it, Nancy giving so graciously and generously of her time and talent today, and all of you giving of your time to be part of the conversation. So everyone's welcome. We never charge anything. You simply need to be here and participate, and we really find these experiences very rich and fruitful. So thanks to Nancy and to all of us. I'm now going to close the program officially with thanks to our water folks, Magdalena and Brooke, who will help to prepare the, hopefully to capture the chat and help to prepare the notes and the video, and we will have this available to you within a week's time. So again, thanks to everybody.